Control your child or I will. The threat cut through the first-class cabin seconds before Susan Miller's hand did cracking across Nia Harrison's face while she clutched her crying baby. The cabin froze. Champagne glasses hovered mid-air. A newborn scream shattered the silence. To Susan, this was just another black mother who needed to be put in her place. What she didn't know what turned this slap into a corporate catastrophe was that the woman she had just assaulted wasn't powerless, wasn't alone, and wasn't ordinary. She was married to the man who owned the airline. And in that moment, a single act of cruelty began dismantling an entire system that had protected Susan for decades. The chaos of JFK's Terminal 7 was a familiar kind of storm for Nia Harrison. She navigated the bustling crowd with the practiced weary grace of a new mother. In one arm, she cradled 6-month-old Leo, his small warm body a precious weight against her chest. With her free hand, she pushed the sleek foldable stroller her designer carry-on balanced precariously on top. She was tired. The trip to New York for her grandmother's 80th birthday had been wonderful, but flying back to London with an infant was a marathon. Leo, usually a calm baby, was fussy. The recycled air, the endless noise, the sheer number of strange faces, it was all setting him on edge. Nia murmured to him, "It's okay, baby boy. We'll be on the plane soon. Just a little longer." She approached the priority boarding lane for Summit Skyways Flight 101. The sign clearly read, "First Class and Summit Diamond members." Nia, holding her first-class ticket, maneuvered the stroller into the empty lane. Immediately, a sharp voice cut through the den. "Mum, this line is for first-class boarding only." Nia looked up. The flight attendant checking passports was a woman in her late 40s with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Susan Miller, Senior Purser. Her smile was a tight painted-on grimace that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, I know," Nia replied, holding out her ticket and passport. "I'm in 2A. Susan Miller's eyes did a slow, deliberate scan. They traveled from Nia's tired, makeup-free face down to her simple but expensive linen tracksuit to the crying baby, and finally, to the ticket. The attendant's painted smile faltered, replaced by a fractional sneer. She clearly hadn't expected this. "Well," Susan said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness as she scanned the passport. "You'll need to fold that stroller before you get to the jet bridge. We can't have it blocking the way." "Of course," Nia said calmly, already sensing the woman's hostility. "I've flown with him before. I know the procedure." "See that you do." Susan sniffed, handing the documents back. "We're trying to get out on time. If the baby is going to be like that, I suggest you take advantage of the pre-boarding to get him settled." It wasn't a helpful suggestion. It was a dismissal. It was a clear signal. You and your crying child are a problem. Nia bit back a retort. Her husband David had always warned her about this. He owned Summit Skyways, having inherited it and transformed it into a global boutique airline. But they'd long agreed that Nia should travel as a normal passenger. "How can I know what our passengers really experience if I'm always flagged as the owner's wife?" she'd argued. David had reluctantly agreed, though he hated the stories she brought back, the subtle dismissals, the assumptions, the quiet, persistent prejudice she faced as a black woman in luxury spaces. "Thank you," Nia said, her voice tight. "I'll do that." As Nia walked past, she heard Susan mutter to her colleague. "Probably an upgrade on points. They let anyone in the front cabin these days. Just watch. That baby will be screaming the entire way to Heathrow." Nia's back stiffened. She adjusted Leo on her shoulder, took a deep breath, and continued down the jet bridge. She wouldn't let this woman ruin her flight. She wouldn't give her the satisfaction. But as she stepped onto the aircraft, she saw with a sinking heart that Susan Miller was not just a gate agent. She was the senior purser working the first-class cabin. This was going to be a very, very long flight. The first-class cabin of the Summit Skyway 757 was an oasis of calm, muted greys, brushed metal, and the soft glow of individual suite lights. Nia settled into 2A, a spacious pod with its own door. She expertly unclipped Leo from his carrier, folded the stroller, and handed it to a junior flight attendant, a young man named Ben. who offered her a genuine kind smile. "He's beautiful. Mom, can I get you a drink before takeoff? Orange juice? Water. Water would be wonderful. Thank you, Ben." Nia said, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Maybe Susan was the exception. Leo, however, was not relaxing. The pressure change was beginning to bother his ears, and his earlier fussiness was escalating into a full-blown distressed wail. Nia immediately went into soothing mode. She stood up in her suite to rock him, whispering and shushing, trying to get him to latch onto his pacifier. She was so focused on Leo that she didn't see Susan Miller approaching until the attendant was standing in the entrance to her suite, arms crossed. "Mom, you need to sit down. The captain has ordered the doors closed, and everyone must be seated for the safety demonstration." "I will," Nia said, not looking up, her focus entirely on her crying son. "I'm just trying to get him to settle. The pressure." "He won't settle if you're parading him around the cabin," Susan snapped. Her voice was loud enough to cut through the hum of the engines and Leo's cries. Several passengers turned to look. "I'm not parading him," Nia said, her own patience beginning to fray. "I am in my own suite trying to soothe my child." "And you're failing," Susan said, her voice low and venomous. The painted-on smile was gone. "You're disturbing the other passengers who have paid a lot of money for peace and quiet." Nia's head snapped up, "And I paid for this seat just like they did. I'm doing my best. If you have a suggestion, I'm happy to hear it. Otherwise, please allow me to care for my son." An elderly man in 3D, Mr. Petro, leaned over. "Leave the poor woman alone. It's a baby." "What do you expect?" Susan shot him a look that could freeze fire. "Sir, I am handling this." She turned back to Nia. "You have two options. Either you sit down now and silence that child, or I will have the captain speak to you about being a non-compliant passenger." The threat was clear. Nia, a successful civil rights attorney when she wasn't on maternity leave, knew her rights. But she also knew the power a senior flight attendant wields on an aircraft. Arguing would only make it worse. Fine. Nia sat down, her body rigid with anger and humiliation. She buckled her seatbelt and tried to cradle Leo, who, sensing his mother's distress, only cried harder. His screams were piercing. Susan stood there for a moment longer, a look of profound satisfaction on her face. "See, was that so hard?" She turned and glided back to the galley, passing Ben, who looked mortified. "Don't just stand there," Susan hissed at him. "Finish the pre-departure checks." Nia closed her eyes, trying to block out the stares of the other passengers. She felt utterly exposed. She rocked Leo, tears of frustration burning in her own eyes. David was going to hear about this, but for now, she was trapped 30,000 FT in the air with an employee who had just declared war on her. The plane had been in the air for an hour. Leo had finally blessedly fallen asleep against Nia's chest, his small face tear-stained. The cabin lights were dimmed, and the meal service was beginning. Nia was exhausted, but relieved. She'd skipped the champagne, but Ben had quietly brought her a hot chamomile tea and a bottle of water. "Is there anything else I can get for you, Mrs. Harrison?" Ben asked in a whisper. "No, thank you, Ben. This is perfect." She'd just taken a sip of tea when Leo stirred and started to whimper. His diaper was wet. Nia knew she had to change him quickly before the whimper became a wail. She carefully gathered the changing pad, diapers and wipes and stood up, balancing her sleeping son. She took one step out of her suite toward the lavatory at the front of the cabin. Susan Miller materialized from the galley, blocking her path. "And where do you think you're going?" "To the lavatory," Na said, keeping her voice low. "He needs a change." "The fastened seatbelt sign is on." Susan lied. The air was perfectly smooth and the sign was off. "No, it isn't." Nia replied, gesturing to the illuminated no smoking sign, but the dark seatbelt one beside it. Susan's face darkened. "I am telling you to sit down. The captain is anticipating turbulence. We are not having you in the aisle. I've been waiting for an hour. The sign is off. I am going to the bathroom to change my child," N said firmly, her patience gone. "You are not," Susan said, planting herself firmly in the narrow aisle. "You are going to sit down and stop making a scene." You are the only one making a scene. Nia said, her voice rising, despite herself. You have had a problem with me since the moment I got in line. Now excuse me? Nia tried to step around her. It was this movement, this simple assertion of her right to pass, that pushed Susan over the edge. How dare you, Susan shrieked. You don't talk to me like that. You people are all the same, thinking the rules don't apply to you. And then, in a movement that seemed to slow down time, Susan Miller raised her hand and slapped Nia Harrison across the face. The sound was a sharp, ugly crack that echoed through the silent cabin. Nia's head snapped to the side, her cheeks stung a raw hot fire. Leo, jolted by the impact, let out a terrified lung-bursting scream. For a second, the entire cabin was frozen. The only sound was Leo's cry. Nia stood in stunned silence, one hand flying to her face, the other instinctively clutching her baby tighter. Mr. Petro in 3D shot to his feet. My God, I saw that. You hit her. Susan, realizing what she had done, immediately went on the offensive. Her eyes were wide, but her voice was pure ice. She pushed me. She was aggressive. She threatened me. She's unruly. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Nia. You saw it. She put her hands on me first. That is a lie. Mr. Petro shouted. I was watching the entire time. You blocked her, and you assaulted her, and she's holding a baby. Ben, the junior attendant, rushed out from the galley, his face pale with shock. Susan, what happened? This passenger is out of control. Susan yelled, creating her own narrative. She needs to be restrained. She's a danger to the flight. Nia finally found her voice. It wasn't a scream. It was a low, dangerous calm that was far more terrifying. Get away from me, she seethed, backing into her suite. Oh no, Susan said, advancing her face, a mask of triumphant malice. She saw an opportunity. You're not getting away with assaulting a crew member. You slapped me, Nia whispered. The reality of it hitting her. The humiliation was so profound, it was suffocating. I defended myself, Susan spat, and now you're going to deal with the consequences. Nia sat down in her suite, her entire body shaking. She was trying to soothe Leo, but he was inconsolable. She looked at Susan at the other passengers, staring with a mix of horror and morbid curiosity. She had been humiliated. She had been racially profiled, and now she had been assaulted, all while holding her son. The senior purser turned to Ben. Get the restraints and call the captain. Tell him we have a level 2 threat in the first-class cabin. Ben stood frozen. Restraints, Susan. I don't think... Are you disobeying a direct order from your senior purser? Susan snarled. This passenger is unstable. She is not unstable, Mr. Petro roared, unbuckling his own belt. She is the victim. If you bring restraints, you'll have to restrain me too, because I will not sit by and watch this. A woman in 1A, who had been silent until now, pulled out her phone and was visibly recording. I'm filming this, all of it. The flight attendant is lying. Susan saw the phone and her composure cracked. Filming is not allowed. You give me that phone. The cabin was descending into chaos, but Anna was no longer paying attention. The shock had receded, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. She was an attorney. She was a mother. And she was done. She ignored Susan, who was now arguing with the passenger in 1A. She ignored Ben, who was hovering uselessly. She ignored the stairs. She settled the screaming Leo as best she could, pulled her own phone from her diaper bag, and unlocked it. The plane's Wi-Fi was active. She had one message to send. Susan noticed, and now she's on her phone. Absolutely not. You are to cease all communication. You are a security risk. Susan lunged for the phone. Nia pulled it back, shielding it with her body. You touch me again, Susan, and the assault charge will be the least of your problems. The authority in Nia's voice, the sudden shift from victim to predator, gave Susan pause. She stopped just inches away. Who are you calling? Susan mocked, recovering. Your lawyer. Good luck. By the time we land in London, you'll be in police custody. Something like that, Nia said. She didn't make a call. She sent a text. It was to one person, David Harrison. The text was simple. Flight 101 employee Susan Miller. She just slapped me while I was holding Leo. Handle it. A second later, 3 dots appeared. Then a reply. What seat 2A? She's threatening to restrain me. Says I assaulted her. The reply was instant and terrifying. I am grounding the plane. Don't say another word to her. I'll be at Heathrow before you. I love you. Grounded, Nia thought. He couldn't. They were over the Atlantic. Her phone rang. The screen read, David Harrison. Nia answered it, putting it on speaker. Nia, are you and Leo okay? David's voice was calm, but it was the calm he used in boardrooms before he tore a company apart. We're shaken. My cheek hurts. Leo is terrified, but we are not in immediate physical danger. Nia said, her voice clear and precise. The lawyer taking over. Susan's face went white. She heard the name, but it couldn't be. It was a common name. Good. David's voice came over the speaker. Now please hand the phone to the flight attendant. She's refusing to hand it over. Susan stammered, her brain trying to catch up. Hand the phone, David's voice commanded. To the woman who assaulted my wife. The entire cabin heard it. My wife. Susan Miller's blood ran cold. She stared at Nia, her mind flashing back to the rumors, the memos, the photos she'd ignored in the company newsletter. The CEO, David Harrison, his new wife, a black woman, a lawyer. No, Susan whispered. It was a sound of pure denial. Hand her the phone, Susan, Nia said. Holding it out, shaking, Susan took the phone. This is Senior Purser Miller. Susan. David's voice was quiet, but it beamed through the silent cabin. You are on the plane's satellite phone. The captain is about to receive an order from the Summit Skyways Corporate Flight Operations Center. That order, which comes directly from me, the owner of this airline, is to divert to the nearest suitable airport. We will be landing in Shannon Island. Divert, Susan squeaked. When we land, David continued, his voice devoid of all emotion. You will be met on the jet bridge by Irish police. You are fired effective immediately. Your flight benefits your pension, and your career are over. But that is just the beginning. You put your hands on my wife. You endangered my son. By the time my lawyers are done with you, Susan, you will wish you were only in prison. The phone clattered from Susan's numb fingers. It fell to the carpet. She looked at Nia, not at an unruly passenger, not at a woman who couldn't control her child. She was looking at Nia Harrison, the woman who owned all of this, the woman whose husband had just grounded a 7707 in the middle of the ocean. Susan Miller began to hyperventilate. Just then, the captain's voice came over the PA, laced with a new profound urgency. This is Captain Reynolds. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for an immediate landing. We are diverting to Shannon Island due to a security-related passenger incident. We will be on the ground in approximately 45 minutes. Every eye in first class was on Susan Miller. Her mask of authority was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed terror of a cornered animal. The calmer had arrived, and it had just shut down the entire flight. The descent into Shannon was a masterclass in tension. The cabin was utterly silent, save for the hum of the engines and the occasional gulping sob from Susan Miller. She had retreated to the galley, where she was being watched by Ben, who, on instructions from the captain, was to ensure she didn't go near Nia again. Nia, for her part, was a statue. She held Leo, who had cried himself to sleep, and stared out the window at the dark Atlantic. Her cheek throbbed. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary ache and a simmering volcanic rage. It wasn't just the slap. It was the assumption, the calculated cruelty, the belief that Nia was powerless and that her child's comfort was an annoyance to be managed, not a need to be met. Mr. Petro quietly flagged Ben. Young man, please get the lady. Mrs. Harrison, a glass of water, and perhaps an ice pack for her face. Ben, looking relieved to have a useful kind task, nodded. Yes, sir. He brought Na a soft cloth bag filled with ice. Mrs. Harrison, I'm so sorry. I should have... I don't know. Nia looked at his terrified 20-year-old face. It's not your fault, Ben. But let this be a lesson. Never be the bystander. Your superior was in the wrong. You knew it. You should have called the captain yourself. Yes, ma'am, he said, chastened. When the plane touched down on the tarmac in Shannon, it didn't taxi to the main terminal. It was directed to a remote stand where a set of rolling stairs was already waiting, flanked by 2 police cars, the Guard Sienna, and a black sedan. The captain's voice returned. We have arrived. Due to the nature of this incident, we ask that all passengers remain seated. The authorities will be boarding the aircraft. The cabin door opened. 2 uniformed Garda officers and a stern-looking man in a suit. Mark Jenkins, the Summit Skyways European Operations Director, stepped aboard. Mark Jenkins had been routed from a meeting in Dublin. His face was a thundercloud. He clearly knew who was on this flight and what had happened. He walked past the galley, ignoring Susan, and went directly to Suite 2A. Mrs. Harrison? He said, his voice low and deeply respectful. I am Mark Jenkins on behalf of Summit Skyways. My God, your face. I am. There are no words. We have a private lounge prepared for you and your son. Mr. Harrison's private jet is being fueled. It will be here in an hour to take you to London. Nia just nodded, too tired to speak. Mrs. Harrison, one of the Garda officers, said, his Irish brogue soft. We're here to take a statement. The other woman, Miss Miller, will be taken into custody. Would you be willing to press charges for assault? Before Nia could answer, Susan Miller let out a wail from the galley. No, please. It was a mistake. I was stressed. The passenger was non-compliant. She pushed me. Mr. Petro stood up again. Officer, that is a categorical lie. I am Gregory Petro. I'm in 3D. I saw the entire event, as did the passenger in 1A. We have video. Your employee, he said, pointing at Susan, is a violent, prejudiced bully who assaulted this mother while she was holding her child. I will testify to that in any court in the world. The Garda officer looked at Mr. Petro, then at the passenger in 1A, who held up her phone. I'll send it to you right now, officer. My name is Dr. Ann White. I'm a surgeon. My testimony will be precise. Susan's defenses crumbled. She was trapped by a cloud of witnesses. Yes, Nia said, her voice finding its strength. I will press charges. Please. Susan sobbed as the second officer moved toward her. Please, Mrs. Harrison, I have a mortgage. I have worked here for 25 years. Please don't do this. Nia looked at the woman who had slapped her just an hour ago. The woman who had sneered at her. The woman who had threatened to have her restrained. She felt nothing. No pity, no compassion. You should have thought of your mortgage before you put your hands on me. Susan Nia said, you should have thought of your career before you decided a black woman in first class didn't belong. You didn't just slap me. You slapped a mother. You slapped a customer. And you are the face of this airline. You are the liability my husband has been trying to root out. Mark Jenkins signaled to the officers. Get her off this plane now. Susan Miller was led off the aircraft in tears, her 25-year career ending on a remote tarmac in Ireland. As she was put in the police car, she looked back at the plane, her face a mask of disbelief. Mark Jenkins turned to the rest of the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be bringing on a new crew from Dublin. This will take approximately 2 hours. For your profound inconvenience, Summit Skyways will be refunding your tickets for this flight in full and issuing a $10,000 travel voucher to every passenger. We apologize for this unacceptable failure in our service. Mr. Petrov grunted, It's the least you can do. Nia gathered Leo and her bags. Mark Jenkins and Ben escorted her down the stairs to the waiting black sedan. As she stepped off the plane, the cold Irish air hit her bruised cheek. It was over. But David had said, that is just the beginning. She knew her husband. The real storm was yet to come. The private lounge at Shannon Airport was a sterile conference room. But the staff had scrambled, filling it with water snacks and even a hastily acquired travel cot for Leo. Nia sank into a chair, the ice pack pressed to her cheek, which was now a blossoming, ugly purple. She was alone for less than 10 minutes when the door burst open. David Harrison didn't just enter a room, he consumed it. He was tall with a sharp suit and an energy that vibrated with suppressed rage. He saw Nia, and his face, which had been set in stone, crumpled. "Oh, Nia," he whispered. He crossed the room in 2 strides, knelt before her, and gently brushed the hair from her face, his eyes fixed on the bruise. He actually, she, Nia corrected, her voice thick. "Her name is Susan Miller." David repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "She did this." He kissed her forehead, then gently stroked Leo's head, who was sleeping peacefully in the cot. "He's okay. He's fine. Just scared. I am so sorry, my love," he said, pulling her into an embrace. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I let you talk me into this secret shopper nonsense. It's over. You're never flying commercial again. Not on my airline. Not on any airline." "David, don't," Nia said, pulling back. "This isn't your fault. This is her fault. And it's the fault of a system that protected her. I guarantee you this is not the first time she's done this. It's the last." David set his features hardening back into the CEO. He stood up and pulled out his phone. "Mark Jenkins is recruiting the 101. They'll be on their way. I've already spoken to our head of communications. The story is going to break. The passenger in 1A, Dr. White, has already sent her video to a news outlet. We're not going to hide from it. We're going to get in front of it." He dialed. "Rebecca, it's David. It's worse than we thought. Yes, physical assault. I want a statement drafted immediately. No corporate excuses. I want us to take full 100% responsibility. We had a racist, violent employee. We failed. We are cooperating fully with the Irish authorities on the assault charge, and we are launching a full-scale internal audit of every complaint ever filed against this employee and find out who her manager was. I want them fired by midnight. I don't care. Make it happen." He hung up and looked at Nia. "That's just for tonight. Tomorrow, we begin the real work." "What about Susan?" Nia asked. "She's at the Shannon Garter station." David said, "Our Irish counsel is there, but not to defend her. He's there to provide her employment file to the police, which lists every complaint ever filed against her." "And Nia," he paused, "this is your call. You're the lawyer. You're the victim. We can settle. We can handle this civilly, or we can burn her to the ground. You tell me what you want." Nia looked at her husband, the man who owned the sky, who was willing to unleash his corporate arsenal on one woman. "I don't want to just burn her, David," Nia said, her voice finding its steel. "I want to burn the system that made her feel safe. I'm not Mrs. Harrison in this. I'm Nia Harrison Esquiet, and I'm a mother she assaulted. I'm filing a civil suit not just against Susan Miller for assault and battery, but against Summit Skyways." David stared at her. "You're suing me. Suing your own husband's company. I'm not suing you. I'm suing the corporate entity for negligent hiring, for negligent retention, and for fostering a hostile environment. We are going to use the discovery process to rip this company down to the studs. We're going to find every single complaint Susan Miller ever had. We're going to find every manager who signed off on it, who told a passenger they were overreacting. And we are going to make it so expensive for this company to ignore prejudice that they will never let it happen again." A slow smile spread across David's face. It was a predatory, admiring smile. "That's my wife. You'll need your own law firm, of course. A neutral third party. I'll call Robert in the morning." Nia said, naming the senior partner at her own firm. "This isn't about money, David. Every cent we win from this lawsuit is going into a new foundation, a fund for minority aviation professionals, pilots, attendants, mechanics. We'll call it the Summit Foundation for Equity." "Done," David said, kissing her again. "Now let's get you home. The jet's on the ground. We can be in London in an hour." As they walked out of the lounge, David's arms securely around his wife. Mark Jenkins was waiting. "Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison, your car is waiting." "Mark," David said, not stopping. "You have 48 hours to deliver me a file containing every passenger complaint filed in the last 5 years, sorted by race and gender. I want to know who else is on the payroll like Susan. Find them, root them out. Or I'll find someone who will." "Yes, Mr. Harrison, right away." The hard karma wasn't just hitting Susan Miller, it was a shockwave that was about to hit every corner of Summit Skyways. Susan Miller spent 12 hours in a holding cell in Shannon before she was released on bail, pending a court date in Ireland. Her passport was confiscated. She was ordered not to leave the country. Her firing was the least of her worries. She was now facing a criminal assault charge in a foreign country. Summit Skyways had fired her via a curt email which she read on her phone in the grim lobby of a budget airport hotel. She was in an instant a pariah. She made a frantic, tearful call to her union representative. The rep's voice was cold. "Susan, we've seen the video. It's bad. I'm not sure what we can do." She pushed me. Susan shrieked. The lie so ingrained she was starting to believe it herself. She was non-compliant. It was a high-stress situation. She was holding a baby Susan, the rep said, her voice flat. And she's Nia Harrison, the owner's wife. Do you have any idea the position you've put us in? The company is invoking the morality clause in your contract. They're saying your actions have brought Summit Skyways into global disrepute. They're not only firing you, they're cancelling your pension. That was the blow that took Susan's breath away. My pension, they can't. 25 years. They can't. They can. And they are. We'll fight it. But honestly, Susan, I wouldn't hold your breath. Susan was stranded. Her face was now all over the internet. The video Dr. White had taken was on every news site from the BBC to CNN. Airstrike. Airline attendant slaps mother holding baby. The headlines were brutal. Her name, her image, her 25 years of service, all of it was being picked apart by an outraged public. She tried to call her colleagues. No one answered. Ben, the junior attendant, had already given his statement to the police, a statement that fully corroborated Nia and Mr. Petrov's version of events. But the worst was yet to come. Back in New York, the internal audit David Harrison had demanded was underway. A team of forensic accountants and HR specialists, led by the third-party counsel Nia had hired, was digging into Susan's file. What they found was horrifying. It turned out Nia was right. This wasn't Susan's first incident. It was just the first one she couldn't bury. They found 17 separate passenger complaints against Susan Miller over the last decade. A complaint from a Muslim man who was repeatedly searched by Susan, who claimed he looked nervous. A complaint from a black family that Susan had accused of stealing airline blankets. A complaint from an elderly passenger whom Susan had mocked for being slow. A pattern of seating adjustments that moved minority passengers from premium seats. All of them. Every single one had been dismissed. And they were all dismissed by the same person, Diane Foster, the regional HR manager and Susan's close personal friend. The investigators found the email chain. Susan would write, "Passenger was difficult, non-compliant, and aggressive." And Diane would write back, "Handled per protocol. No further action needed." David Harrison read the report in his London office, his face growing darker with every page. He picked up his phone. "Get me Diane Foster in Human Resources in my office." Now Diane, who had heard the rumours but thought she was insulated, walked into the CEO's office. David didn't ask her to sit. He simply pushed the report across his desk. 17 times Susan Miller was reported for discriminatory or abusive behaviour. And 17 times you buried it. You signed off on it. You protected her. Diane turned white. "Mr. Harrison, we have protocols. Difficult passengers." Was Mrs. Harrison a difficult passenger? David asked, his voice a whisper. "Was my 6-month-old son non-compliant? I didn't know. You didn't know it was my wife. That's the problem. You thought she was just another passenger you could ignore. Another complaint you could shred. Your job, Ms. Foster, was to protect this company and its passengers from people like Susan Miller. Instead, you protected your friend. You are an accomplice to this. You're fired. Security will escort you out. Your assets will be frozen pending our investigation into corporate malfeasance. We will be suing you to recover the damages your negligence has cost this company." "Sue me?" Diane gasped. "You and Susan both," David said. "Get out." Diane Foster, The woman who had wielded the power to ruin passengers' experiences was escorted from the building, her career in ashes. The hard karma was spreading. The civil lawsuit, Harrison versus Miller and Summit Skyways, became the most watched corporate legal battle of the year. Nia was not just the plaintiff, she was the architect of the entire strategy. She refused to be a quiet, dignified victim. She was on the cover of magazines not as a wronged wife, but as a legal powerhouse. Her deposition was a masterclass. Ms. Miller, Nia's attorney, Robert Vance, began, "Can you explain to the court why you felt it was necessary to use physical force against Mrs. Harrison?" Susan, whose life was now a smoking crater, sat across from Nia. She had lost her house to legal fees. She was represented by a court-appointed lawyer. She was aggressive. "She was coming at me. I was afraid." "You were afraid," Robert repeated, "of a woman who was holding a 6-month-old child. A woman you outweighed by 30 lb and who was half a foot shorter than you. She was yelling." "Let's play the video," Robert said. And the courtroom was filled with the sound of Leo's crying and Susan's sharp, acidic voice. "You need to control your child. You're failing." Then the crack of the slap, the gasp, Nia's stunned silence. It seems to the court, Robert said that the only person yelling, the only person being aggressive, was you, Ms. Miller. You weren't afraid. You were angry. You were angry that a black woman was in your first-class cabin and wouldn't bend to your will. Isn't that the truth? "No, I'm not. I'm not like that," Susan cried. "Then let's look at Exhibit B," Robert said, projecting the 17 other complaints. Mr. Ahmed, the Thompson family, Mrs. Gable, all of them described the same behavior: hostility, aggression, prejudice. "You weren't a flight attendant, Miss Miller. You were a bully. And your friend in HR, Diane Foster, let you get away with it." Susan Miller's defense crumbled in less than an hour. The judgment was swift. The court found Susan Miller guilty of assault and battery. The civil damages were astronomical. But the real victory was the settlement with Summit Skyways. The company under David's direction didn't fight. They settled for a record-breaking 9-figure sum. The next day, David and Nia Harrison stood on a stage at a press conference. Nia, looking powerful and serene, stepped up to the podium. Her cheek had healed, but the memory was seared into the public consciousness. "What happened to me on Flight 101 was not an isolated incident," Nia began. "It was the result of a system that allowed prejudice to fester. It was the result of employees who felt protected and passengers who were made to feel powerless." Today that ends, she announced the full 9-figure settlement amount. A gasp went through the press corps. "This money," Nia continued, "will be the founding donation for the Summit Foundation for Equity, an independent organization dedicated to providing scholarships, training, and career support for minorities in the aviation industry. My husband's company was responsible for this, and my husband's company will fund the solution." She introduced the foundation's new board, Mr. Gregory Petro, Dr. Bran White, and several prominent civil rights leaders. David spoke next. "Summit Skyways failed. I failed. I promised my wife I would build an airline that was better, and I let this happen. The settlement is only the beginning. Today, I am announcing a complete overhaul of our customer service and HR policies. We are implementing mandatory ongoing anti-bias and de-escalation training for every single employee, from the baggage handlers to my executive board. We are creating a new independent passenger advocacy board with full authority to investigate and terminate employees, and its first director will be Nia Harrison." The karma was complete. Susan Miller's act of hate hadn't just destroyed her own life. It had triggered a revolution. She had tried to put Nia in her place, and in doing so, had given Nia the power to rebuild the entire company. The Irish courtroom in Ennis, County Clare, was small and suffocatingly quiet. It lacked the grand drama of a London or New York courthouse, which for Susan Miller made the humiliation all the more potent. There was no grand gallery to play to only a few local reporters and the unblinking, damning eye of a small video camera. Her trial was a formality, a foregone conclusion. The prosecution's case was built on the unassailable rock of Dr. Ann White's high-defin video. It was played 3 times. The first time, the entire courtroom flinched at the sharp crack of the slap. The second, the prosecutor paused it on Susan's face, contorted in rage. The third, he played it without sound, letting the sheer, unprovoked violence of the act speak for itself. Mr. Gregory Petrov, flown in from New York, was a devastating witness. His voice, steady and authoritative, cut Susan to the core. "I have flown millions of miles in my life," he stated, looking directly at the judge. "I have seen stressed attendants. I have seen difficult passengers. What I saw on that flight was neither. I saw a bully. I saw a woman who had decided from the moment Mrs. Harrison entered the gate that she was a target. The slap was not her reaction. It was a conclusion. It was the physical expression of the contempt she had shown for hours. Susan's own testimony was a pathetic, crumbling ruin. "I was stressed," she whimpered, a narrative she had repeated so often she almost believed it. "The baby was screaming. She was non-compliant. She pushed me." The prosecutor, a sharp-witted local man named Mr. Boyle, didn't even raise his voice. "Ms. Miller, you state you were pushed. Can you please, on this diagram of the aircraft aisle, show us where you were standing and where Mrs. Harrison, who was holding a 6-month-old infant, supposedly pushed you?" Susan fumbled with the diagram. Her story unraveled. There was no room. There was no push. There was only her blocking the aisle. "So you were not pushed," Mr. Boyle concluded calmly. "You were simply inconvenienced, and for that inconvenience you struck a mother who was holding her child." The judge, a formidable woman named Justice Fiona Carroll, delivered her verdict without retiring. Her eyes were chips of ice. "Ms. Miller, you were not just a flight attendant. You were the senior purser. You were vested with the authority to ensure the safety and indeed the comfort of every passenger on that aircraft. You took that authority and you welded it into a weapon. You targeted the most vulnerable passengers in your care, a new mother and her infant child. You did not de-escalate. You escalated. You did not protect. You assaulted. The act itself is appalling." Justice Carroll continued, her voice rising. "But the motive, the clear and present prejudice that every witness has described, is a cancer. You are a disgrace to your uniform, to your airline, and to your profession." The sentence was the final nail. Susan was found guilty of assault. The judge sentenced her to the maximum allowable fine, 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service to be served in Ireland. And the final brutal blow: your passport will be held by the Gardaí until your service is complete. You are, in effect, grounded. Grounded. The word hit Susan like a second slap. She who had lived her life in the clouds, who had looked down on the world from 30,000 FT, was now trapped, stranded, bankrupted by the initial massive civil judgment Nia had won. She had no money to fight, no money to flee. She was a prisoner on the very island her own fury had forced the plane to land on. Her new life began the next day. Her community service was at a St. Vincent de Paul charity shop in Ennis. She, who had once served champagne and caviar in brushed metal suites, now spent 10 hours a day sorting through bags of musty donated clothes and wiping down for Masika tables. The locals knew exactly who she was. The savage attendant the papers had called her. They didn't speak to her. They would drop their bags of old jumpers, stare at her with cold contempt, and walk away. She lived in a single damp room above a pub, the smell of stale beer and mildew her constant companions. Every night she would stare at the ceiling. Her 25-year career, her pension, her house, her life, all of it gone, incinerated in a single hateful instant. The collateral damage was just as total. In New York, Diane Foster, the HR manager who had been Susan's shield, was facing her own reckoning. She had been fired for gross negligence. But the true punishment was the lawsuit Summit Skyways had filed against her personally alongside Susan for corporate malfeasance. David Harrison's lawyers argued that her negligence had directly cost the company over $100 million in settlement fees and reputational damage. Diane found her name was not just unhireable, it was toxic. She sat in an interview for a mid-level HR position, her suit immaculate, her smile practiced. The interviewer, a young VP, scanned her resume. 15 years at Summit Skyways. Impressive. But you left, let's see, right after the Flight 101 incident. Foster, my God, you're that Diane Foster, aren't you? Diane's smile froze. I was cleared of any wrongdoing. She began to lie. You were the one who buried 17 complaints, the VP said, his voice flat as he closed her file. You protected the woman who assaulted the owner's wife. Do you have any idea the liability you represent? The interview was over. It was the last one she ever got. Bankrupted by the lawsuit, she couldn't fight, she lost her condo. The old girls' club that had once enabled her now saw her as a leper. The karma had found her too. In stark, glorious contrast, Summit Skyways was being reborn. The Nia Harrison initiative was not a PR stunt. It was a root and branch revolution. Na, as the new head of the Independent Passenger Advocacy Board, was relentless. She had full authority from David to clean house, and she did. A dozen other employees, including 2 senior managers who shared Deanne's bury it philosophy, were fired. The training center was completely redesigned. Ben, the junior attendant from Flight 101, was now a lead training supervisor. He stood in front of a room of 50 new hires, all in their crisp new uniforms. On the screen behind him was the video. The room was silent as they watched the assault. This, Ben said, his voice ringing with authority, was our darkest day. This was the old Summit. This is what happens when power replaces empathy. Susan Miller saw a problem to be silenced. Your job, our job, is to see a human to be helped. You see a crying baby. You don't see an annoyance. You see a mother who is stressed. You ask, "Can I hold him for you while you get settled? Can I get you some water?" Nia watched from the back of the room, a small smile on her face. The new training modules, which she had personally helped design, were mandatory. They included de-escalation through empathy, identifying unconscious bias, and the power of assistance. The culture was shifting one flight at a time, and the money, the massive 9F Figueroa settlement, was already at work. The Summit Foundation for Equity had in its first 2 years changed hundreds of lives. Nia stood on a windy tarmac in Arizona next to a beaming young woman named Maria Sanchez. Maria, the daughter of immigrants from East LA, had just completed her first solo flight in a training jet. She was the recipient of the Foundation's Captain's Scholarship. "Mrs. Harrison." Maria said, her eyes shining with tears as she clutched her certificate. "My whole life I've just been cleaning hotel rooms with my mom. I looked at planes. I never thought you didn't just give me a scholarship. You gave me a sky. You earned that sky," Maria, Nia said, pulling her into a hug. "I can't wait to fly with you. Welcome to Summit." This was the true victory. The money taken from an act of hate was being used to build a future of inclusion. The final scene of the reckoning was not explosive. It was quiet, and it was eternal. 2 years after her sentencing, Susan Miller's community service was complete. Her probation was over, but her passport was returned to a woman who had nowhere to go. She was unemployable in the only industry she had ever known. She was a pariah. The only job she could get was as a cleaner for the Shannon Airport Authority. She pushed a grey janitorial cart through the bright modern terminal invisible in her dull blue smock. She was wiping down the glass of a departure gate, her movements robotic. And then she saw it, the dark blue tail fin with the silver Summit logo. The 777 to New York, her old flight. She watched as the new crew walked past, fresh and full of energy. They were a snapshot of Nia's new world. The captain was Maria Sanchez, her face bright with command. She was flanked by her cabin crew, a tall, smiling black man, and a poised professional Asian woman. They were laughing, talking about their briefing. They were everything Susan was not. They were diverse. They were happy. They were the future. Susan Miller stood frozen, her hand on the dirty glass, a ghost haunting her own past. She watched them board the plane, the jet bridge connecting to the aircraft she would never set foot on again. She had tried to slam a door on one woman, and in doing so, had locked herself out of the entire world. The planes, the sky, the life it all flew on without her, leaving her grounded forever, with nothing but a grey rag and the bitter permanent taste of her own karma. The story of Nia Harrison is a shocking reminder of what can happen when prejudice and power collide. A slap that was heard around the world didn't just end one flight attendant's career. It sparked a revolution. It proves that one person's refusal to be a victim can change an entire industry. But this isn't just a story about a rich man's wife. It's about a powerful black mother who took an act of violence and turned it into a force for justice. Susan Miller learned that the hard way the hand you use to strike someone down might just be the one that signs your own ruin. What do you think of the hard karma Susan received? Was it enough? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that justice was served, hit that like button and make sure to share this video with someone who needs to see it. And if you love stories where the powerful are held accountable, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell.